Welcome. If you are joining us today, I already know something about you. You are a curious learner.
Absolutely.
You're the kind of person who doesn't just want the timeline of what happened. You want the why and the how underneath it all.
Which is exactly why we're here.
Well, you are in for a truly fascinating journey today. We have an incredible deep dive queued up for you, pulling from a pretty massive stack of historical archives, biographical records, and musical analyses.
The source material on this one is just fantastic.
It really is. So our mission today, we are focusing on a single extraordinary individual, a 24-year-old pianist who managed to fundamentally lay the groundwork for rock and roll.
Yeah.
He literally named an entire musical genre and left a permanent mark on global culture, all before his life was tragically and suddenly cut short. We are unpacking the life and wild legacy of Clarence Smith.
Better known to history as Pinetop.
Exactly. Clarence Pinetop Smith.
It is a phenomenal narrative. And to truly grasp the weight of it, we have to look at the broader cultural tectonic plates that were shifting at the time.
Right, the big picture.
Exactly. What we are examining today isn't just a biography. It is the exact moment a massive musical transition occurred.
You mean the shift out of the ragtime era?
Yes. We are looking at the connective tissue that links ragtime straight to the roaring birth of rock and roll.
It's wild to think about.
It is. And beyond the music, this serves as a profound case study in how a cultural legacy can take on a mind of its own. It echoes through decades, changes shapes, and outlives its original creator in ways that, frankly, border on the surreal.
Yeah, that legacy piece is huge. And just to give you a quick teaser of where this journey is heading today, how does a guy playing piano at a crowded, sweaty house rent party end up directly handing Ray Charles his biggest early hits?
A great question.
Right. How does his music sell 5 million records posthumously during the height of World War II?
Also wild.
And how does his brief life inspire a wildly dangerous avant-garde public monument decades later? Okay, let's unpack this.
To really understand the phenomenon, we have to start at the origins. Long before the hit records, the stolen identities, and the historical monuments.
Right. So let's look at where it all began. Clarence Smith was born on June 11th, 1904, down in Pike County, Alabama.
A vital starting point.
Now, going through the historical notes, there is a slight dispute about the exact geography.
Which is pretty common, honestly.
Yeah, some records point to Troy, Alabama.
Yeah.
Others insist on Orion, Alabama, which is just a bit north.
And the Encyclopedia of Alabama kind of reconciles this by noting that his parents, Sam and Molly Smith, were living in Orion when he was born.
Okay, so Orion first.
Right, and then the family moved to Troy shortly after. But it's interesting to ask why there is always this geographical haze when we look back at early blues pioneers.
It happens a lot, right?
It is a common thread you find when researching African-American families in the rural South during the turn of the 20th century.
Because the records just weren't there.
Exactly. Record-keeping was often fragmented, marginalized, or entirely reliant on oral family histories rather than centralized municipal data.
That makes a lot of sense.
What is absolutely undeniable, though, is that his foundational years, the sights, sounds, and rhythms that shaped his early consciousness, were entirely rooted in Alabama.
And there is a detail from his childhood that I absolutely love because it strips away all that mythology and just gives you the human being.
The nickname.
Yes, you hear a legendary name like Pinetop Smith, and you might assume it has some deep, mystical Delta blues origin story.
Like he made a deal at the crossroads or something.
Exactly, but he got the nickname Pinetop as a kid simply because he loved climbing trees.
I love that.
He was just a boy who wanted to be up in the pines. It is such a relatable, everyday image.
It really grounds him in reality.
It does. Eventually, as a teenager, he moves with his family up to Birmingham. But his real professional pivot happens a few years later.
Yes, 1920 is the critical juncture here.
He leaves the South entirely.
He does. He moves to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And this is where the rigorous, often unforgiving grind really begins.
Because he's not just playing parlor piano for friends anymore.
No, not at all. He becomes a working entertainer on the Theater Owners Booking Association circuit, universally known as TOBA.
TOBA.
Yeah.
And this was the legendary Black Vaudeville circuit.
Exactly, the precursor to what would later be called the Chitlin circuit. And it was notoriously demanding.
Looking at early playbills from that era, you realize he wasn't just sitting behind a piano with his head down.
He couldn't afford to.
Right. He was a versatile entertainer. He was working as a singer, a tap dancer, and even a comedian.
It's incredible.
What did it actually take to survive on a circuit like that?
It required absolute thick skin and relentless adaptability. The TOBA circuit was grueling.
I can imagine.
Performers dealt with brutal travel schedules, segregated and often substandard accommodations, and audiences who demanded their money's worth.
So it was a tough crowd.
Very tough. If you couldn't hold the room, you were off the stage. So versatility wasn't just a party trick for him, it was a survival
So
mechanism.
you had to be able to do it all.
You had to read a raucous Friday night crowd, understand pacing, project your personality to the back of the room, and keep people engaged by any means necessary.
And he was clearly doing something right, because he starts working as an accompanist for some absolute titans of the era.
Some really big names.
Yeah, he's backing up blues legends like Ma Rainey, as well as the famous comedy music duo Butterbeans and Susie,
That is the ultimate trial by fire.
because the expectations are so high.
Exactly. When you are accompanying the mother of the blues, like Ma Rainey, you have to be musically flawless.
No room for error.
None. You must provide a rock-solid foundation while simultaneously knowing when to step back and let the star shine and when to fill the dead space to keep the energy alive.
It's a delicate balance.
It is. And if we connect this to his later genius, Smith's foundational skills weren't developed in the sterile, quiet environment of a conservatory.
Right.
They were forged in the multidisciplinary, highly interactive crucible of live touring. He learned the very architecture of audience reaction.
Which acts as the perfect bridge to his big move. The moment he steps out of the background and into the spotlight.
The Chicago move.
Yes, in 1928, he heads to Chicago. He gets a recommendation from a fellow musician, Cal Davenport, who points him toward J. Mayo Williams.
A prominent producer at Vocalion Records.
Exactly. Pinetop packs up, takes his wife and young son, and moves to the city. Now, I was reading about his living situation in Chicago, and the concentration of talent seems almost impossible.
It's one of those amazing historical coincidences.
Who was he actually rubbing shoulders with when he got there?
He landed right in the epicenter of a musical revolution. For a time, he was living in the exact same rooming house as Albert Ammons and Meade Lux Lewis.
That is basically the holy trinity of early Boogie Woogie piano, all living under one roof.
Precisely. It was a true incubator. Imagine the South Side of Chicago in 1928.
It must have been electric.
It was a cultural magnet for Black artists migrating from the South. These musicians weren't operating in isolation. They were literally living on top of one another in these rooming houses.
Just constantly sharing ideas.
Sharing ideas, competing, swapping rhythmic techniques, and relentlessly pushing the boundaries of what the piano could do. It was a hyper-competitive but deeply collaborative environment.
And all of that energy, that vaudeville training, and that rooming house collaboration culminates on a single pivotal date in this deep dive.
December 29, 1928.
Yes. This is the day Pinetop Smith sits down in the Vocalion studio and records Pinetop's Boogie Woogie.
What's fascinating here is the sheer rhythmic architecture of what he laid down that day.
Let's get into the music a bit.
Well, we know that the piece featured rhythmic breaks, which were a staple of ragtime, but it's what he was doing with his left hand that changed the world.
The bass line.
Right. He employed that driving, repetitive, 8-to-the-bar locomotive bass line.
She just keeps rolling forward.
He was taking the syncopation of ragtime and injecting it with a relentless, forward-leaning momentum.
It feels heavier than ragtime.
It is. That specific left-hand engine was the fundamental rhythmic blueprint that early rock and roll guitarists and drummers would directly adopt decades later.
And the music itself is only half the story. There's the title, Pinetop's Boogie Woogie.
A historic title.
Archival records indicate this was the first known use of the phrase boogie woogie on a commercial record, and definitely the first to use it in a title.
Which is huge.
He cemented the moniker for an entire musical genre in one afternoon.
It is exceedingly rare for historians to be able to point to a single recording session and say, here's the exact moment the genre got its name.
It usually evolves so slowly.
Right. The phrase had likely been floating around in slang, but Smith codified it. He gave it a permanent global identity.
But honestly, when you listen to the track, the most magnetic part isn't just the piano playing.
It's his voice.
It's his voice. He talks over the entire recording. He's actively instructing the dancers. The notes mention he originated this specific routine at a house rent party in St. Louis, Missouri.
You can really hear that party atmosphere.
You hear him directing the girl with the red dress on to not move a peg until he tells her to shake that thing and mess around.
It's brilliant.
It is so vibrant and immersive. You aren't just listening to a song. You are being yanked directly into a crowded, sweaty living room in St. Louis.
That is the vaudeville training showing its immense value. He understood that a record shouldn't just be a static performance.
Right, it should be an event.
Exactly. And if we trace those specific lyrical and interactive choices forward, the lineage is incredibly direct.
You mean with Ray Charles?
Yes. Those exact phrases, mess around, and what I say were the direct, undeniable inspiration for Ray Charles.
That is incredible to think about.
Decades later, Charles would build massive, career-defining hits around those exact concepts and audience interactions. Smith established a template for call and response that became a permanent staple of R&B and early rock.
It feels like the ultimate liftoff moment. He has the hit, he has codified the genre name, he has the interactive style that audiences are eating up.
He has it all.
He is standing on the absolute precipice of superstardom. And then we hit March 15, 1929.
Yes. The tonal shift here is abrupt and jarring, but it reflects a harsh reality of the environment and the era.
On March 15, 1929, the very day before he was scheduled to be back in the Vocalion studio for his next major recording session, Clarence Pinetop Smith was killed.
Such a tragedy.
He was shot in a dance hall fight in Chicago. He was only 24 years old.
It is a profound, incalculable loss for American music.
And it was so sudden.
And the historical record surrounding that night contains a significant amount of ambiguity. It remains unclear whether Smith was the intended target of the violence, or if he was simply an innocent bystander caught in the crossfire of someone else's dispute in a chaotic dance hall.
It is just senseless. And the way it was remembered by those who were actually in the room that night is haunting.
Truly haunting.
There was a headline from Downbeat magazine published in 1939, a full 10 years after the fact, written by an eyewitness.
I know the one we're talking about.
And it read, "I saw Pinetop spit blood and fall." That is such a visceral, traumatic memory for a witness to carry for a decade.
It speaks volumes about the shock of the event. The sudden, violent erasure of a monumental talent leaves a deep psychological scar on a community.
It really does.
And unfortunately, the tragedy of his death was heavily compounded by how his legacy and his remains were treated in the aftermath.
Right. He was buried at Restvale Cemetery in Alsip, Illinois, but it was in an unmarked grave.
For entirely too long.
It wasn't until the year 2014, 85 years after he was killed, that an organization called the Killer Blues Headstone Project finally secured and placed a headstone for him.
85 years.
85 years. The man who named Boogie Woogie and laid the tracks for rock and roll sat in an unmarked grave for nearly a century.
It is a deeply bittersweet reality. It highlights a recurring theme in early American music history.
Oh, so...
Well, marginalized artists often struggled for basic dignity in death, even while their cultural contributions were quietly circulating and changing the entire landscape of global music.
Which brings us to the ripple effect. Because even though his life ended at 24, his output in those few weeks of recording was incredibly prolific.
He got a lot done in a very short window.
The Vocalion 78 RPM singles catalog shows that right around the time of his death, he had recorded several other tracks. Pinetop's Blues, I'm Sober Now, Jump Steady Blues, and Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out.
He was laying down a massive amount of material.
And that material absolutely did not disappear.
It was deeply respected by his peers immediately. Albert Ammons and Pete Johnson both cited him as a primary influence.
But the mainstream explosion, that took a little longer, right?
Yes. The massive mainstream explosion of his work took a different vehicle to reach the masses. That arrived almost a decade later in 1938.
Tommy Dorsey and his orchestra.
Exactly.
They take Boogie Woogie, they arrange it for a massive big band, and they record it. Now, it wasn't an overnight sensation, but it eventually caught fire during World War II.
It became huge.
It ultimately became Tommy Dorsey's best-selling record with over 5 million copies sold. But why did a big band arrangement of a gritty Chicago house rent party song resonate so powerfully during the Second World War?
It's an interesting phenomenon.
Was it just broader distribution, or was something else happening?
It was a perfect storm of cultural timing and musical energy. You have to look at the zeitgeist of the early 1940s.
Okay, set the scene.
The nation is industrializing rapidly for the war effort. There's a tremendous amount of anxiety, and the home front is looking for escapism.
Right.
The driving 8-to-the-bar rhythm of Boogie Woogie mimics the sound of locomotives, of factories, of forward motion. It was incredibly propulsive and danceable.
So it matched the energy of the country.
Exactly. When a polished, mainstream white orchestra like Tommy Dorsey's smoothed out the gritty edges of the original recording but kept that locomotive rhythm, It became the exact energetic release the country was craving.
And it wasn't just Dorsey. Bing Crosby issued a version in 1946, and Count Basie did one too. Everyone was cashing in on this sound.
Which is the ultimate double-edged sword of cultural transmission. The music reaches millions of people, it brings immense joy, and it literally defines an era of American history.
Yeah.
But the original architect of that sound, the 24-year-old kid from Alabama, is entirely absent from the financial windfall, the radio play, and the immediate public applause.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Oh, the identity theft part.
Because it wasn't just his music that got borrowed as the decades rolled on, it was his actual identity. In the 1950s, a piano player named Joe Willie Perkins recorded his own version of Pinetop's Boogie Woogie. And because of the success of that recording, Joe Willie Perkins became universally known in the industry as Pinetop Perkins.
A completely new Pinetop.
Right. He went on to be Muddy Waters' pianist and had a massive, legendary career operating under that borrowed nickname.
The irony in that specific situation is profound and incredibly layered.
How so?
Well, in 2004, when Pinetop Perkins was in his 90s, he released an album called Ladies' Man.
Okay.
On that record, he included a song that actively played on the fact that almost the entire blues-listening public mistakenly thought he had written Pinetop's Boogie Woogie.
Wow.
Yes. The misconception became so deeply embedded in the culture that the artist who borrowed the name was making meta-commentary about the public, assuming he owned the song.
It's wild. It's like a copy of a copy taking on a life of its own. And the misattribution doesn't stop with the nickname.
We mentioned Ray Charles earlier.
Right. We talk about how Pinetop Smith's Rent Party lyrics directly influenced him. Well, when Ray Charles adapted the song into his massive hit Mess Around, the authorship wasn't credited to Clarence Smith.
He was credited to someone else entirely.
He was credited to someone named Anujadra, which, if you spell it backward, is Erdogan. It was a pseudonym for Ahmet Erdogan, the famous record executive at Atlantic Records.
Which was a very common practice.
So once again, the true origin gets legally obscured.
This forces us to look closely at the fundamental clash between oral tradition and rigid copyright law during the 20th century.
They just didn't mix well.
Not at all. Early blues, jazz, and boogie woogie were largely developed in communal live settings, like those crowded house rent parties.
Where things are just passed around.
Right. Riffs, lyrics, and rhythms were passed around by ear, modified, and shared. But when those organic, community-owned creations intersected with the highly structured, legalistic machinery of the recording industry...
The people with the contracts won.
Exactly. The people holding the pens and the contracts usually ended up with their names on the royalties. The original creators, especially marginalized artists, were frequently left entirely off the paperwork.
But despite the lack of official paperwork and the stolen credits, the artistic community definitely remembered him. And they remembered him in some incredibly unique, boundary-pushing ways.
The tributes.
Yes, the archives detail two avant-garde tributes that just blow my mind. In 1975, the Bob Thiel Orchestra released a modern jazz album.
And they didn't just casually cover his music?
No. They titled the entire album I Saw Pinetop Spit Blood.
Taking that haunting 1939 downbeat headline.
Exactly, and turning the trauma into high art. They included a sprawling treatment of Pinetop's Boogie Woogie right alongside the title track.
It was a bold reclamation of his narrative, and then there's the visual tribute, which is arguably even more striking in its conception.
The Oldenburg Proposal.
Yes. The renowned pop artist Claes Oldenburg proposed a physical monument to Smith in his 1969 book, Proposals for Monuments and Buildings.
But knowing Oldenburg, this isn't going to be a standard bronze statue of a guy sitting politely at a piano in a park, is it?
Not at all. Oldenburg proposed running a massive exposed electric wire down the length of North Avenue in Chicago.
Just a live wire.
Yes, moving west from Clark Street all the way to the corner of Larrabee, which is the exact intersection where Smith was murdered.
Wow.
Oldenburg envisioned a visible electric impulse, colored blue, constantly running along the suspended wire.
That is intense.
In his own words, Oldenburg described the concept by saying, Pinetop Smith invented Boogie Woogie Blues at the corner of North and Larrabee where he finally was murdered. The electric wire is blue and dangerous.
It is such a brilliant, uncompromising piece of conceptual art.
It really is.
It perfectly captures the raw electricity and the propulsive danger of his music, but it also refuses to sanitize his story. It forces you to look at the sudden, violent danger that ended his life.
Exactly. It doesn't allow the listener or the viewer to just enjoy the toe-tapping rhythm without acknowledging the harsh reality of the man who created it.
It really is the perfect encapsulation of his legacy. So, looking back at this incredible stack of history we've navigated today.
It's quite a journey.
We started with a kid in Alabama who just liked climbing pine trees. He survives the grueling gauntlet of the TOBA vaudeville circuit, moves to Chicago, lives in a rooming house packed with future legends, and sits down at a Vocalion piano in 1928.
A lot to happen in such a short life.
In just a handful of recording sessions, he officially names a genre. He lays down the driving rhythmic DNA that will become rock and roll, and he creates interactive call-and-response lyrics that will directly inspire the career of Ray Charles.
And all of this before a senseless bullet in a dance hall ends his life at 24.
And then it took 85 years for him to get a headstone, while his rhythm sold millions of records for big bands, and other musicians literally built careers on his name.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the profound lesson here is about the true nature of innovation.
Where it actually comes from.
Exactly. We often assume that world-changing ideas come from top-down, highly funded institutions or carefully planned corporate think tanks. But true cultural innovation, the kind that shifts the very rhythm of how society moves and feels, often bubbles up from the most unassuming, marginalized, and overlooked places.
It's so true.
It comes from a crowded, sweaty house rent party in St. Louis or a packed rooming house on the south side of Chicago. It is a powerful reminder of how critical it is to look past the mainstream, polished surface of pop culture and dig deeply into the raw roots of the media we consume today.
Because that's where the real story is.
Yes, Pinetop Smith didn't get the chance to live to see the modern world he helped build, but make no mistake, we are absolutely still dancing to his rhythm.
I love that perspective. And it leaves me with one final lingering thought for you to take away from this deep dive.
Something to think about.
If a completely casual set of dance instructions just shouted over a piano to get people moving at a rent party in 1928 could inadvertently lay the absolute foundation for rock and roll and pop music.
What's happening now?
Exactly. What completely ordinary, everyday moments happening around you right now might be quietly sparking the next massive cultural revolution. Think about that the next time you are out listening to live music or watching a crowd react to a new sound. Thank you for learning with us today.